Zhong Kui was born looking like a monster. His head was too large, his features twisted, his eyes bulging with a glare that unsettled even the midwives who held him for the first time. In a world where beauty was considered a reflection of virtue, his face was treated like a curse stamped on his soul. The moment he opened his mouth to cry, whispers began. A demon child, an ill omen, a life destined for shame. Yet those same hands that trembled to hold him would later realize he carried a mind sharper than steel, an intelligence unmatched by other children. Even as a boy, he could recite lines of ancient texts, solve riddles that left elders in awe, and debate philosophy with answers that seemed beyond his years. But his brilliance could not wash away the disgust that followed him wherever he walked. Children mocked him openly, calling him beast or ghost, and adults recoiled as though his face alone carried disease. He learned early that no matter what he achieved, his appearance would speak louder than his deeds. In Chinese belief, the outer form often revealed the truth of one's inner nature. A handsome face suggested a noble spirit, while a twisted one hinted at corruption within. This superstition sealed Zhong Kui's fate before he could ever write his first exam scroll. To many, he was a demon wearing human skin, a living warning of bad fortune. The irony was cruel. The uglier they saw him, the harder he worked to prove he was not cursed. Nights were spent with candles burning low, his brush flying across paper, memorizing verse after verse, law after law, strategy after strategy. He swore that one day he would silence their mockery, not by changing his face, but by elevating his name. If the empire rewarded merit, then his unmatched mind would carry him to the top. And so, while boys laughed and families whispered behind their sleeves, Zhong Kui walked with books in his arms and fire in his chest. His sister tried to comfort him, telling him that his talent was a gift, but he only nodded, refusing to let pity weaken him. Every insult became another reason to rise, every sneer another weight to forge his will into iron. He came to believe that destiny had not cursed him, but challenged him. If his face frightened the world, then he would conquer the world through intellect. This determination grew into an obsession with the highest honor a scholar could earn: success in the imperial examination. Passing it meant not only wealth and power, but recognition by the Son of Heaven himself. For a boy mocked as a demon, there could be no greater revenge. And so he set his path. Zhong Kui, the child branded as cursed, would walk into the very heart of the empire, carrying nothing but his mind and his scarred face, ready to prove that even the most hated could seize glory. The day of the imperial examination arrived, and for Zhong Kui, it was not simply a test, but the battlefield where he would finally crush every whisper that had haunted him since birth. Candidates from across the empire filled the hall, each armed with years of study, but none with the ferocity burning inside Zhong Kui. His brush moved like a blade across the scrolls, each character sharp and precise, his arguments flowing with the clarity of a river in flood. When others hesitated over questions of governance, he dismantled them with ease, writing solutions so complete that even seasoned officials could not find fault. When poetry was demanded, his verses struck with elegance yet weight, weaving together the authority of tradition and the daring of innovation. By the time the last candle burned low, his work shone brighter than any other, and even his rivals could not deny that Zhong Kui was unmatched. In the final ranking, his name stood at the top. Merit alone had crowned him victor, and the promise of office, rank, and honor was within reach. But merit was not enough. When the results were presented before the emperor, the hall filled with anticipation, and the court prepared to honor the champion. Then silence fell. The emperor looked upon Zhong Kui's face, twisted and harsh, a visage that carried none of the grace expected of a man destined to serve as a model for the empire. In that moment, centuries of belief weighed heavier than fairness. Beauty was seen as a sign of virtue, and ugliness as corruption. The emperor broke tradition, tore merit from its throne, and declared that Zhong Kui, despite his brilliance, was unfit to hold office. The hall erupted in shock. Scholars gasped, officials lowered their heads, and Zhong Kui stood frozen, humiliated in front of all. Every night of study, every word of wisdom, every flame of determination was crushed beneath a single cruel judgment. He was too hideous to serve. Anger surged in him, not the anger of a child mocked in the street, but the fury of a man betrayed by the system he had trusted. He had believed the empire rewarded talent above all. Now he saw the truth. His face condemned him more than his mind could ever save him. He staggered from the hall, his triumph turned to ashes, and walked to the palace gates. There he made his decision. He would not crawl back to a life of mockery, nor live as proof that injustice ruled over merit. He pressed his head against the cold iron doors, cursed the emperor's judgment, and ended his life with a blade drawn across his chest. Blood stained the stones, and his body fell before the palace he had sworn to serve. For most men, this would be the end. But for Zhong Kui, death was not the end. His spirit did not fade into dust. In that final breath, fury burned too bright to be extinguished, and from his broken body rose not a defeated scholar, but a ghost hungering for vengeance. His story had only just begun. The palace guards told one story, and the wind told another, because while the stones still held his blood, the night shuddered and Zhong Kui rose where a man should have stayed down. His body lay before the gate, but his spirit did not drift upward or sink away. It hardened. The first place he went was the throne room, where lanterns flickered against lacquered pillars, and the emperor sat surrounded by silence that did not protect him. Zhong Kui stood before the dragon seal with the same scarred face the court had judged unworthy, and he delivered a verdict of his own, not in rage that scatters, but in a calm that cuts. He promised the empire that the measure stolen from him would be reclaimed with interest, and he promised the ruler, who had broken merit, that the weight of injustice would not vanish with the dawn. Then he was gone, and the hall smelled of cold iron and old ink. The realm beyond tried to claim him. The clerks of death called his name, and the wheel of rebirth turned as it always turns, but Zhong Kui refused. He would not be erased, and he would not begin again as a mewling infant while the insult remained unpaid. He walked the border path where the breath of the living meets the hunger of the dead, and he chose a new office that no decree could deny. If the world would not be governed by merit, then he would govern the shadows by force. He began at the city gates, where travelers woke with bruises, made by things they could not see. He tore the mask from a nightmare spirit that pressed on sleeping chests and chained it to his will. In a marketplace, he cornered a greed demon that rode men into riots and bent its neck with a single command. At a bridge, he took a pale ghost that lured the unwary into black water and set it to patrol under his orders instead. He learned the names of pests that live in rafters, the diseases that wear human faces during fevers, and he dragged them one by one into the open. Some he shattered like clay cups. Others he judged useful. Those he marked and bound. Word spread that a new magistrate walked at dusk, and that his court convened wherever fear pooled thickest. The living did not see him clearly, but they felt the change. Homes once sour with whispers grew clean. Children slept. Shopkeepers opened shutters before sunrise without scanning the alleys twice. Even the court heard of visitations that left brushstrokes burned into silk banners, as if a heavy hand had sketched a fanged face to warn that justice did not end at the palace wall. Zhong Kui accepted no worship and asked for no prayers. He was building something that could not be taken by decree. Each victory brought a recruit. Each recruit added reach. The wheel kept turning for other souls while he stepped outside of it and forged a duty that fit the size of his anger and the sharpness of his mind. He was no longer a wrong scholar, searching for a chair in a hall. He was a hunter, opening a ledger of names. And he had already decided that he would not hunt alone. Zhong Kui did not remain a lone phantom, moving through alleys and crossroads. With each battle, his power changed, and the defeated were not always destroyed. Some demons crumbled under his strikes, scattered into smoke and silence, but others he bent to his will. He discovered that terror could be reshaped into obedience, that a spirit too stubborn to be shattered could instead be chained. His enemies became his soldiers. Soon he marched not with footsteps, but with shadows trailing like banners, an army of creatures that once plagued villages now bound to his command. A ghoul that had stalked graveyards became his scout. A fox spirit that had lured men into ruin now whispered secrets from the dark. A plague demon that once gnawed through families carried the standards of its new master. The people did not see this army clearly, but they felt it. Wind moved against them as if hundreds walked unseen. Doors rattled, though no hands touched them. Sometimes at night, the reflection in a basin of water was not one face, but many watching from behind. Stories spread fast. Farmers swore they saw long lines of pale figures moving across ridges at dusk. Merchants told of empty roads echoing with phantom footsteps that kept pace with their wagons. Soldiers returning from distant orders claimed a column of the dead had marched beside them through the mountain passes, silent but steady until they reached safety. These were the troops of Zhong Kui, the scholar who had failed in life and risen in death to command a force larger than any. Emperors. His influence seeped into the homes of the living. Families began painting his fierce visage on door panels, believing that the glare of Zhong Kui himself would terrify wandering demons and keep them outside. Some carved his figure onto talismans worn by children. Others placed scrolls with his name above their beds to drive away nightmares. To many, he became the unseen sentinel of every threshold, the general who patrolled not palaces, but kitchens and courtyards. What emperors feared to control, he seized with iron certainty: the restless dead. His army was not bound by food or pay. They did not rest, they did not betray, and they could march forever. Zhong Kui transformed from scholar to hunter, and now from hunter to warlord. He did not claim thrones or territory, but his dominion stretched across the unseen world. Where a family trembled under the weight of haunting, where merchants lost goods to spectral thieves, where villages buried too many infants under the shadow of fevers, Zhong Kui's soldiers swept through like a storm, breaking the grip of those who fed on fear. Yet his rise was not born of mercy alone. Every victory against evil was also a declaration that he could not be erased, that the empire which had rejected him would forever live under his shadow. People who once spat at his name now called upon it for protection. His story twisted with each retelling until he was no longer a disgraced scholar, but the supreme judge of demons, the iron hand of justice beyond the grave. And so the figure who had been mocked as cursed now stood at the head of a host the living could not see and the dead could not resist. His war against chaos and cruelty had turned him into something greater than a hunter. Zhong Kui had become the protector of every doorway, the guardian etched in red ink above every frame, the general who fought for the living by mastering the dead. It did not take long for the living to realize that Zhong Kui's presence was more than a legend whispered in fear. It was a shield that could be called upon. Families that once trembled at creaking doors and restless nights began to hang painted scrolls of his fierce image, eyes bulging, beard bristling, sword raised high to guard their homes. These portraits were not decorations but weapons, believed to hold the very essence of the ghost general. Demons approaching a threshold marked by Zhong Kui's glare were said to scatter, terrified of his authority. During the new year, when spirits were thought to wander most freely, entire households prepared fresh paintings of him and placed them on their doors, ensuring that the coming year would not be poisoned by misfortune. The tradition spread from villages to great cities, until no gate was considered safe without the ugly face that once drew ridicule, now transformed into a symbol of strength. Markets sold his likeness in woodcuts and embroidered banners. Traveling performers staged plays of his battles, each strike of his sword greeted by cheers from commoners who saw him as both protector and avenger. Even in the imperial palace, where his mortal life had ended in disgrace, Zhong Kui returned in dreams. The emperor who had rejected him began to see visions of the ghost in his sleep, standing at the foot of his bed, surrounded by ranks of spirits awaiting command. In fear and awe, the ruler ordered court painters to capture Zhong Kui's image on silk and wood, displaying it at the palace gates to ward off evil. The irony was heavy. The same hand that had condemned him now spread his likeness as a shield for the realm. Stories claimed that on festival nights, when lanterns glowed across cities and drums shook the air, people marched with banners of Zhong Kui, leading the procession, his painted eyes gleaming in firelight as if the ghost himself joined the crowd. Children were told to honor him, to bow before his image before sleeping, for Zhong Kui kept nightmares at bay. Merchants prayed for him to guard their journeys. Scholars placed his likeness on study walls to clear away distracting spirits, and generals asked his blessing before battle, believing that demons of chaos fled before his phantom legions. Yet beneath this glory, the tragedy remained. His name had risen high, but always tied to the face that condemned him. The world did not celebrate his brilliance as a scholar, nor his wisdom as a man. They celebrated the fury of his spirit, the power of his ghost, the fear his image inspired. What he had once sought in life through honor and recognition came only after death, twisted into a new form he had never chosen. Even as people cheered his protection, he remained the outcast, the hideous figure who secured peace through terror. His triumph was real, yet it was carved from the same wound that had destroyed him. And though he now stood in every household, painted on every gate, he could never escape the truth that his story began with rejection, and that scar could never be erased. Zhong Kui's legend grew until his name was carried across provinces like a storm, but no matter how vast his dominion became, the echo of his first wound never faded. He was feared by demons, honored by emperors, worshipped by families who placed his face on their doors. Yet that face was always the mark of his curse. The very ugliness that had condemned him in life became the symbol that secured his immortality. He was not remembered as the brilliant scholar who had outwritten every rival in the imperial exam. He was not honored for his unmatched knowledge or his loyalty to the empire's ideals of merit. Instead, he was remembered as the grotesque warrior ghost, the twisted visage that terrified spirits into submission. His power was born from the same scar that destroyed his mortal life. This paradox is what makes his story eternal. Each victory he claimed was laced with bitterness, for recognition came only through fear, and the respect he won was inseparable from the revulsion that had doomed him. In this way, Zhong Kui never truly escaped his tragedy. He rose higher than any mortal could, commanding an army of shadows, protecting millions, striking terror into the hearts of demons, yet in every painting and every tale, he remained the cursed one, the man too hideous for honor. His triumph was never clean. It was forged in humiliation, sealed in suicide, and crowned with a kingdom of the dead. To celebrate him was to remember his pain, and that pain became inseparable from his name. The empire turned him into a shield, the people turned him into a guardian, but the wound that birthed him never healed. His story is a reminder that injustice can echo louder than fairness, that rejection can carve deeper than honor, and that even gods and demons are sometimes born from the cruelty of men. Zhong Kui did not fall and then rise again in neat order. His life collapsed, and from the ruins he built an empire of shadows that even emperors came to fear. He remains the eternal contradiction, the most powerful of protectors, shaped by the most pitiful of rejections. His tragedy never ends, because it is woven into the very power that keeps his legend alive. And so when the living paint his face on their doors, when they call his name to guard them, they summon not only a fierce general of spirits, but also the scarred scholar who proved that even divine strength can grow from the soil of human suffering. Zhong Kui is eternal not in spite of his fall, but because of it, a god born from a wound that never healed.